Great. We'll get started. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us and welcome to today's webinar, Cybersecurity in 2022, Trends and What You Need to Do to Secure Your Organization. My name is Emily Troffels, Senior Marketing Communications Manager here at Wursta, and joining me today is Patrick Della Peruta, Wursta's Practice Lead for Digital Workplace, and FT Rower, Account Executive here at Wursta. If you don't mind just reading. This meeting is being recorded, and all registrants will receive a link to view it later this week. We ask you to stay on mute because we do have a good amount of people here, but you can submit questions anytime using the Meet chat. We'll answer them at the end. We'll also be using the polls feature, and you can access polls through the shapes or activities icon in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. Also, does everyone have their coffee? If not, please email me, emily@wursta.com, or drop your email in the chat if you did not receive your Starbucks gift card. We want to make sure everyone's caffeinated and ready to go for today's session. With that, I'll turn it over to FT to get us started.
Thanks everyone for being here. In case you didn't know already, this event is being hosted by Wursta. Our mission is to help organizations maximize their use of the cloud. We work side by side to help our clients make good technology decisions and grow their businesses in ways they wouldn't have the ability to do otherwise. This helps organizations develop cultures of continuous innovation powered by real-time collaboration. With all that collaboration, however, organizations have a lot to worry about in terms of data security. So that's why we're here today and why we've got our Google Workspace expert, Patrick, on the call. Hi, Patrick. Nice to see you.
Great to see you too, FT, and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you. With it being 2022, do you have any good New Year IT resolutions?
It's a great question. I usually focus my New Year's resolutions on like personal goals, like going back to the gym or,
Yeah, same here. But my girlfriend kind of dragged me into starting a juice cleanse. So that's how I start my weeks now.
Interesting.
Yeah, I'm doing the opposite of a juice cleanse.
What's the opposite of a juice cleanse, Emily?
I have a relative who's living in Germany who gave me a big bag of German chocolate. So I'd like to say that I'm on a chocolate cleanse, if that's a thing.
I think it is now. Anyways, as far as the security world is concerned, there's a lot to pay attention to in 2022.
And that's right. And, I get started from, what we're seeing in the industry, what we're seeing from our customers. Improving your security footprint will be the driving force behind internal changes at organization, and really rightfully so. But to your question, and I feel like this would probably be a New Year's resolution every year, but for us internally at Wursta, at the top of our list is our continued focus on end user security training. So rolling out phishing simulations, partnered with a third party, educating and using encryption techniques, specifically in Google Drive now. And then this year we are introducing a custom tailored Google Classroom experience for security related training courses, which we're going to make required for our employees. We just feel, the threats continue to evolve and increase every year, and we know this isn't going to go anytime soon. So we're laying the groundwork for what we believe will be a good continuous education program.
I couldn't agree more, Patrick. So let's dive into specifics and hear what everyone on this call thinks. What do you all think the top security trends will be in 2022? We've got a poll for you in the right corner of your screen.
Wait for some results to come in here. Thanks to everybody for voting. Votes are still coming in. Phishing is leading the pack. And yeah, it's breaking out way in front here. So, and it was somewhat of a trick question, as all of these are relevant. We actually have a short blog post on these three topics that Emily, I think, will share in the chat. Yeah, so phishing wins out with 11 votes. Mark's still coming in, 13.
And this is what we'll be focusing on today: phishing, exposure, and regulation.
That's right, FT. We highlighted these three areas as we're not only working on them internally, but it is at the top of mind for our customers in Workspace. All of these factor into Google Workspace in some way. So whether you're a new Google Workspace customer, thinking about adopting Google Workspace, or have just sort of let your security controls, be ignored over a number of years, all of these should apply to you as your administrator, to you within Google Workspace.
So let's go over these at a high level. Phishing, spoofing, ransomware, etc. continues to be the biggest threat to the security of an organization. Users can be easily targeted through social media, malicious browser extensions, or inadvertent app authorizations. Exposure. Safeguarding your data and the partners you choose to manage it is more important than ever. We'll go over recent examples of how vulnerable we all are when it comes to exposing our data. Regulation. Companies face greater consequences for data malpractice. Ensuring your systems are compliant with government regulations can be tricky, but costly if not implemented. Today, we'll go over these three in detail and how Google Workspace can provide a solution.
Thank you, FT. And to start, we're going to have a little bit of an interactive session here. To start, I mean, ransomware and phishing attacks, as we all know, have gotten more sophisticated. So let's together go through an exercise of trying to identify some phishing attacks and what they are versus a normal email. So if you have not seen this before, I think we'll drop the link in the chat here. And this is a free little utility from Google where you can run through a very brief 8-question phishing simulation. We do, you can distribute this to your employees. We think it's a great little exercise to get them thinking about this. So let's take a look at this together. We have a question here. Hopefully this is coming through easy enough for everybody to read. So we have two options here. Is this message phishing or legitimate? So we can take a few pieces of the content here and sort of scan through it to make a determination whether or not this is phishing. We can see the email address here, luke.jason8000@gmail.com. Looks like a relatively safe and benign email address. We don't see anything in the message headers. We can, through this simulation, though, hover over things like the links in this email. We can see here at the bottom of the screen that's popped up. Notice the URL here, and just take that into account. And what do we think? Do we have some chat responses coming in? Okay, so we think it looks legit.
I think it looks real.
Do you think this one looks real? Final answer is wrong. This is actually a phishing email. And we can notice that by the URL. So if you hover over the button here in this one example, you can see the URL that's popped up is drive-google.com/luke.johnson. This, in practical purposes, would not be a valid Google URL. So this, as you're getting these emails, would be something to train your users to look for if they see something that looks like a normal sharing notification, but is not. And you can go through the show me and showing us what we got wrong and answering this question. So we'll go through the next. So here's another one. Message from eFax. Let's see if anything pops out specifically about this one. We know eFax, that looks like their logo. I think I have my answer here. Do we have any input from the audience?
Can you make the screen a little bigger?
A little bigger?
There we go. That's better.
Awesome. There we go.
Jorge says it's fake or phishing.
All right. I would agree with that, and we'll take a look at why. So that is correct. Nice job, Jorge. Well spotted. As you can see, the sender's email domain is misspelled. eFax, F-A-C-K-S. Where did that hide? I zoomed in, I lost it. There we go. So while the logos look right and the content is formed correctly, like an eFax message, the sender domain, they're using a spoof domain. Google has incorporated some controls specifically for spoofed domains. So this is a control that you can turn on in Workspace to help safeguard against these kind of examples. In the interest of time, I don't know if we're going to go run through all of these. What do you say, Emily? We'll do one more? Or you want to go through all of them?
Yeah, one more should be good.
All right. All right, we have one more here. Hopefully this is large enough. So we have, this looks like a personal email. Time for a trip down memory lane. Do you remember TK from school? Let's see. So comes in via what looks like a normal email address. It's coming into my personal Wursta account. Let's do a quick hover over the link that's included here. And this is definitely popping out at me. So drive.google.com.download-photo. What does everybody think? We got a response, one for phishing. Any more? And that is Matt, thank you much. That is definitely phishing. As you can see, by just hovering over the URL, we can see that the malformed URL there has nothing to do with Google. So the URL has been modified. This is not a legitimate link. This is absolutely phishing. But because these kind of threats come in from Gmail addresses, right, our protections around things like SPF and DMARC and things like that are not always going to help, because Gmail, for Workspace customers, Google is generally going to let those messages through unless there's been a number of reports about a specific address being a spammer. So educating your users what to look for in Gmail, I think, is the most important function that we could serve as administrators. So let's go back to the presentation here. And just to expand on that, while these tests are good, this is a simple test. You can't retain any historical performance data, right? So we don't know, we can't grade our employees on how well they've gone through that phishing simulation with that specific example, as it is a free sort of little utility. There are some great third-party solutions that provide phishing simulation and training modules. KnowBe4 would be our top choice as a recommendation for third-party as a paid service. You can contact Wursta if you're interested in KnowBe4. And then there's a great open source utility that I used at my prior role. Goes by the name of GoPhish, and that is GoPhish. Open source utility, Linux-based, really great, powerful utility, and will allow you to get some of those metrics that you may be looking for. So you can start to identify your repeat offenders, or those who may need more training than somebody else, put it that way. And again, Google Workspace, of course, includes many of the controls that you need to safeguard against phishing and spoofing. Beyond its what I think is best in class spam engine, Google has, over the last 12 months or so, added a number of safety features around Gmail. So within your admin console, if you are a Workspace customer now, under your Gmail app, there is a specific section for email safety. And within that section are a number of controls around warning messages that you can present to your users when they receive an email that looks like it comes from eFax. So that eFax example is a good one to represent how Google's trying to get in front of spoofing of domains, right? So Google, on that email that we saw from eFax, would have added a big yellow banner to that saying, hey, this is saying it comes from eFax, but their domain is a little bit different, right? So all of those controls are now baked into Google Workspace. If you haven't looked at those controls, or you're not sure how to enable those controls, reach out to your Wursta rep, and we'd be happy to help guide you through that. With that said, we're about 10 minutes out already. Wow. Let's move on to exposure. And I think we have another poll for everybody. So Paul, do you know how many third-party apps are accessing data in your organization? I can even expand that question to a couple, but we'll start with that. I think Emily's going to post it for us, and we'll wait for the results to roll in here. Okay. And we're going to, less than 10 to 20. Oh, this is a neck and neck race. 20 plus. SaaS apps, your cloud stack is growing. This is actually in line with what I expected. A lot of over 20 answers here. But yeah, we got some results coming in. Excellent. All right, so having controls in place for how your data is accessed, I think it's an area that Google improved on over the years. I've been a Workspace, Google Apps, G Suite administrator since 2010. Early on in Google Apps days, there was no way to control API scopes or OAuth grants, things like that. Google has incorporated all of that into now into Google Workspace. So I look at exposure as not only preventing your users from inadvertently sharing files in Drive to the public, which we have plenty of use cases and case studies on and how that can impact your business, but to think about the extensions that your users are using, the web apps that your users are using. All of those can result in some sort of exposure. And there was a recent case in the news with Log4j. If anybody followed, tech news back at the beginning of the month, Log4j was a vulnerability. It gained traction in terms of exploiting that vulnerability, and it caused a scare not only across our customers, but here internally as well as we handle a lot of data, not only for ourselves, but for customers. We needed to reach out to each one of our vendors to make sure that their systems were protected. So there was a phone tree of calls that we had to make sure that our partners, our vendors, the ones that we've trusted to access data in some way, shape, or form, are also protected. This, I think, along with training users, are one of those things that IT administrators should be focused on. Within Google, for example, limiting your OAuth scope. So going into your Google Workspace admin console, going into your API section, blocking all apps except for the ones that you trust, and then limiting the ability for new apps to tap into data via API scopes until you approve that app to do so. Example I like to give is a user from a consumer perspective going to something like Pinterest. Pinterest, if you've never used it before, has a login with Google button or create an account using your Google account. So many times users just doing that, they're connecting their corporate accounts to those web services, and all of a sudden your data is exposed in some way, shape, or form. Same thing on API controls and Chrome extensions. There are ways to control and allow access to only the things that you want to allow for.
Thanks, Patrick. And let's continue to our final trend, regulation.
All right, move along here.
We don't get a lot of people asking or coming to us regarding regulation. If an organization needs to follow something specific, like HIPAA, they're very much aware. However, by diving into the tools with an expert, something is often uncovered. And Patrick has an example that he can share with us.
Thanks, FT. Yes, that definitely probably applies to each of these slides for sure. But regulation, not only from a FERPA, HIPAA, GDPR perspective, SOX compliance, if you're a public-facing company and all that, right? There are plenty of regulations that keep IT administrators busy. We have a webinar coming up on the 3rd around HIPAA specifically. If you are a Workspace customer, fine-tuning your controls so that you are HIPAA compliant, very important. But in terms of regulation, and think about it from a internal organization perspective as well. And the example that FT referenced was recently working with a customer we were engaged with on a professional services agreement. And during the course of it was actually a technical meeting, we on the Wursta side had brought up the concept of email retention. So we had asked the customer, what are your email retention policies internally? They are not a public-facing company. They are not bound to any government regulation or policy. But the notion, and sorry for the dogs, the notion of having a retention rule in place for their email, for their employees, was not something they had considered before. In fact, it reminded them of a use case where there was an e-discovery matter where they had to produce evidence for an e-discovery or a litigation matter. And because they had all of that data from 10 years ago, they actually had to produce it. Whereas if you have a defined policy internally within your organization that says we retain email for no longer than 2 years, and you start purging email from Workspace, for example, after 2 years, as long as that is your defined policy, in the event that you are facing a litigation matter where you have to provide discovery, you can only provide what you have retained. So it's those kind of regulation items and policies that we like to help organizations adopt internally. Changing the way that users save email or telling a user that they can no longer save the email that they received 9 years ago often doesn't go over well. So that's where our change management experience comes into play. But yes, regulation, I think, along with the other items that we've talked about, is going to continue to grow. We're going to see continued adoption of things like GDPR or CCPA here in the U.S., specific to California. Those kind of regulations will continue to move themselves forward in other states and other parts of the country, I think. So regulations for sure.
Awesome, Patrick. And let's continue with what Wursta can do to help. We have an extensive list of services, trainings, and offerings that can help you with all 3 topics we discussed today. We'll be in touch after today's session to provide you with the resources you need to get started.
That's right, and thank you. You'll see a lot of these overlap, actually, especially on the training and education, which we think is the most important track to go down. We've got a variety of resources available, from training and change management to technical professional services, all integrated with Google Workspace and Google's products. But with that said, in terms of updates, there were a couple of other sort of smaller updates I wanted to throw out. These are coming off of Google's update blog, which a lot of them came out towards the end of 2021. But these are also initiatives that we're working on internally and tie into some of those themes that we talked about. That's Drive encryption. So that is a new service coming to Google Drive. If you check Google's update blog, you'll find some information about how Drive encryption will work. But we feel that this is a nice evolution of Google Drive and really the next step that Google needed to take in terms of security. Data protection, or DLP, within Google Chat. So Google has updated its rules engine for data protection. Gmail Drive have been included now for a year or so. That is now extended to Google Chat, which we are in the process of rolling out here. And then finally, one that I'm super excited about is Drive labels. Drive labels are a way to meta tag your files in Drive, and that can be done either manually by your users or automatically through policy and rules. Those Drive labels can then actually dictate some other actions within your organization. So for example, you can have a rule that says anybody in my C-suite, anytime they create a Google Doc, automatically get a label of confidential. And then any document that has a label of confidential is not allowed to be shared externally. So small example of how you could potentially use Drive labels. And again, if you hadn't seen those or you're interested in potentially rolling those out, please reach out to your Wursta rep. I'd be happy to jump on the phone and talk through that with you.
To sum up, today we discussed security trends and what to prepare for in 2022, and even a brief recap of late 2021 Google security updates and features. Before we get into questions, we'd like to share that we have an upcoming event on February 3rd about HIPAA 101. Also, you can view this event and any of our past events on our YouTube channel or website. As we mentioned earlier, we're here to help guide you through securing your organization. Your Wursta rep will be reaching out to schedule a quick call to go over those details and to debrief on today's webinar. We'd love your feedback. There's a link in the chat with a short survey to tell us what you thought of today's discussion.
Thank you, F2.
I know we have 3 minutes left here. We do have a question for these last 3 minutes. Patrick, Paul's wondering, what are some protections for ransomware?
So within and I'll tailor my response to Workspace specifically. So Google does a number of things around ransomware, and there are some additional controls you can adopt to help with that. On the Google Drive side, we'll start there. Google Drive can be attacked by ransomware in an organization that allows for Drive for Desktop, formerly known as FileStream. this has the potential, so there is a potential for ransomware to encrypt drive files, which sounds kind of crazy, but that is certainly a possibility. So thinking about Drive for Desktop and limiting who can access, or at least the machines that can access Drive for Desktop. So through your endpoint controls within the admin console, you can, for example, limit the ability to use Drive for Desktop to just approved devices or just approved users. So that would be sort of area one that I would look at, is Drive and those Drive controls around Drive for Desktop. From an email perspective, Google does a lot of this malicious link scanning and attachment scanning ahead of time, right? So their systems are set up to do that for you already. And they do a good job of identifying bad URLs for sure, and things like that. There are additional controls within Workspace that will help with the malicious attachments slash ransomware. To name a few, I would look to enable attachment compliance within Workspace. So I have an organization that has an inbound email rule. Any email that has an attachment goes to quarantine. So no attachment can be delivered to an end user. That may be a little bit, on the tighter side in terms of controls, right? Very strict there, as it does have an impact to business continuity. But the decision was made. They wanted less risk there, and that was the way they approached it. So attachment compliance would be one. The email safety controls I touched on a little bit earlier. I mentioned the spoofing features that they have there. In that section, there's also malicious attachments and malicious link scanning. They do need to be enabled. They are off by default. So those would be two areas that I look to dive into as well.
Thank you.
Yep. I think we're at the top of the hour. Emily, I'll hand it back to you. Any other questions? I'm sorry, I'm not looking at chat.
Oh, I don't see any others, but if anyone has any more questions, you can put them in the chat and we can follow up with you after the call. Thanks for the question, Paul. That was a great question.
Yep, absolutely.
We'll be on here for the next couple minutes if anyone has anything else. But thanks so much for everyone for coming. Thanks, Patrick.
You got it.
T. We'll talk to you all soon.
Thank you all.